Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's America Walks webinar, Safer Vehicles, What Will It Take for Government Action? Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday. We got a great program ahead of us for today. Next slide, please. I am Ben Crowther. I'll be your facilitator today, your moderator, or whatever you want to call me for today's webinar. I'm the policy director at America Walks. Next slide, please. And we're really thankful here at America Walks to our partners who sponsor our webinars, Tool Design and EcoCounter. And you too can become a sponsor of our webinars. If you appreciate the content that we put together here at America Walks, our work is made possible through your donations that supports our support of grassroots action. So a link is available in the chat if you'd like to donate today. And of course, importantly, if you have any questions for our panelists, you have at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. We'll ask that you ask your questions there. We'll answer the most important question now. Yes, this webinar is recorded, and yes, it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you'll have access to it later and can share it with others as well. I'd like to go ahead and introduce our great panelists today. We have three of them offering a variety of perspectives from different parts in the country with different types of organizations. From the West Coast, we have Jodie Medeiros, Executive Director of Walk San Francisco. And Jodie's responsible for leading Walk SF's work. She has a long and successful history leading communications, fundraising, and advocacy at urban livability, active transportation, and poverty alleviation nonprofits. Prior to joining Walk SF, Jodie was Deputy Director at the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition, where her work was critical in passing Home SF, a policy to incentivize building more affordable and family-friendly housing. During her 8-year tenure as development director at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, she helped grow the organization from 4 to 17 staff and collaborated on the Great Streets Project, which led to Sunday Streets and the now thriving Parklet program. We'll be hearing about Jodie and Walk SF's work in the safer vehicles realm as well today. Next, we have Kea Wilson. Kea is the senior editor for Streetsblog USA. She has more than a dozen years experience telling emotional, urgent, and actionable stories that motivate average Americans to get involved in making their cities better places. She's also a novelist, a cyclist, and affordable housing advocate as well. And she comes to us from St. Louis, Missouri today, where she's also a local advocate on the ground. And last, we have Amy Cohen, who's co-founder and president of Families for Safe Streets. After Amy's 12-year-old son, Sammy, was killed in 2013 in front of her home, she joined with others and helped found Families for Safe Streets. Amy's helped lead numerous New York legislative successes, including lowering the speed limit, getting the nation's largest speed and safety camera program, passing legislation implementing a master plan redesigning streets, and much, much more. Amy is a social worker and was previously an administrator of a large social service agency. So I'm going to go ahead and set the stage for us a little bit today, set the stage for our panelists, and provide you all, our audience, with a bit of a landscape of what's been going on in terms of government action for safer vehicles. So I'll provide this overview to start. And then we'll have our panelists talk about their perspectives on how to best advocate for safer vehicles and safer streets more broadly. So this is a graph of a really tragic trend where we're seeing in recent years more and more people killed on our roads. In 2022, that number was 46,027 people. That was slightly down from 2021 by about 900 people, but wrong direction. There's still a increasingly disturbing trend on this graph, where we see that there's a greater proportion of people outside vehicles who are being killed, while people inside vehicles, that number, that percentage is decreasing. So government's taking steps, we're taking steps to protect occupants of cars and trucks at the expense of people outside of them. And so in 2022, that was 7,508 pedestrians killed out while walking. That was an increase from 2021, and that's a 83% rise since 2009, so a little over the last decade. Really disturbing trend. And there are several factors that we know are contributing to this growing crisis. We have dangerous design of streets and roads, not designed for anyone beyond the occupants of vehicles, like we see in the top left. We have dangerous behavior, things like drivers speeding, drivers driving under the influence, driving impaired. And we have dangerous vehicles, so particularly overly tall vehicles with front blunt ends that have limited visibility from the driver's seat. And all these factors contribute to this crisis, but we're going to focus today particularly on safer vehicles and what you can advocate to do to make them safer at the national, state, and local levels. But we do have some resources to share, particularly from the Road to Zero Coalition. If you want to learn more about the dangers of large vehicles, we'll be putting that in the chat. So I mentioned we're looking at these three different realms where advocates can take action: the federal, the state, and the local. And we really want to focus today on those last two, the state and local, and some of the novel approaches that our panelists have been working on, in the last years, or covering in the case of Kea and Streetsblog. So a little bit of lay of the land. What's been happening in the past several years, and where does that trajectory take us? At the federal level, there's two areas that govern safer vehicles through regulations. One is the New Car Assessment Program, NCAP. That's probably best known to people as the star safety rating that a car gets when you go to purchase it at the dealership. That is, those star ratings are informed by optional safety features that aren't necessarily mandatory, but get you higher stars if you have more of them. And then there's the federal motor vehicle safety standards. These are things that are required in all vehicles, things like airbags and seat belts. Unlike NCAP, they are mandatory. I put in here as well a little bit of a chart of the rulemaking process. It is unfortunately not a very quick process. It takes a lot of time and effort from particularly to advocate for these changes as they come about. But we have seen some come about in the past several years, even if some of these programs are started under the Obama administration. We've seen in May 2023 a proposal to update NCAP with a pedestrian crashworthiness program that will add a rating for how safe that vehicle is for people outside of it. That's in that step 3 process. right now. So let's say halfway-ish to being done. There was in April of 2024 a federal motor vehicle safety standard, a requirement that pedestrian automatic emergency braking be incorporated in all new vehicles. That's technology that detects pedestrians and automatically stops the car. That rule has actually been finalized. So it's nice to see that get across the finish line. And there's actually a rule currently in this request for comment period. That's step 2 area that was evaluating the design of hoods with regards to how deadly they are when someone is struck by a car. And we at America Walks, we have an action alert open now. If you want to submit that comment, it's one click to do so in support of finalizing this rule as quickly as possible and getting even more federal motor vehicle safety standards in place that protect people outside cars. We'll put that link in the chat. Highly encourage everyone to submit a comment if they haven't already. And we have some social media that you can share as well to get the word out. And finally, at the federal level, the last thing I'll cover here is a recently introduced bill. You can see that's one of the ways that a rule come into place, passed through legislation called the Pedestrian Protection Act, introduced by Representative Mary Gay Scanlon out of Pennsylvania. And this would require new federal motor vehicle safety standards that directly address vehicle size, that address the lack of visibility from the driver's seat, all those things that make big vehicles deadly. So we'll be paying attention to that as Congress reconvenes next year. At the state and local action, I'm going to cover this really briefly because our panelists are going to talk about a lot more today. We had in California, very close to the finish line, California legislator passed a bill requiring all new vehicles to have intelligent speed assistance, a technology that reads the speed limit where you're driving and requires drivers to adhere to it. That was ultimately vetoed by Governor Newsom, although the votes on the Assembly and state side passed with healthy margins on both sides. We've seen some programs pop up around intelligent speed assistance for reckless driving, repeat offenders in particular, and speeding. This is passed in Washington, D.C., proposed in New York State. We've seen incentives to buy and own smaller vehicles through vehicle weight fees when you register your vehicle. That's been proposed in New York State, DC, and Colorado. And then we have, which we'll talk a bit more about today as well, America Walks Safe Fleets Challenge, where we've had encouraged city states and now the federal fleet in partnerships with Families for Safe Streets to adopt intelligent speed assistance for their own vehicles. There are also other opportunities to make fleets safer at the local level through things like under-ride guards and other design features that make vehicles safer. And we have some resources to share as well from the Vision Zero network on how to integrate some of those fleet safety components into your local Vision Zero plan that we will share in the chat. So that's the lay of the land, and I'm going to ask our panelists to hop onto the screen and introduce themselves. We'll start with Jodie.
Thank you, Ben, and hello, everybody. I do have a couple of slides that I'm going to share to help navigate this conversation. So let's start here. This is me and my team. So this is Walk San Francisco. What I like to say is we're pretty small but mighty. And Walk San Francisco was founded 25 years ago, and we are the only pedestrian advocacy organization working to make San Francisco the most pedestrian-friendly city in the country. And we were instrumental in helping the city establish its Vision Zero policy in 2014. We also run a local chapter of Families for Safe Streets, and this is the group or people that have been either traffic violence victims themselves or they've lost loved ones. Amy is one of the founders of the national group, and Walk San Francisco and San Francisco Bay Area Families for Safe Streets runs one of the local chapters. You'll hear a lot more about the importance of this group in our advocacy. Every year, more than 1,000 Californians are killed in speed-related traffic crashes and tens of thousands are injured. And this is why Walk San Francisco, being a small local organization, has been involved in working in Sacramento on state policies. And recent victories, we've done everything from lowering speed limits by 5 miles per hour on our most dangerous streets to getting a speed camera bill passed, which will see 33 speed cameras installed in San Francisco by February of 2025. And last year, Senator Wiener, who used to be a city council member in San Francisco, approached us regarding SB 961, which was vehicle safety equipment. I have to say that this did start out by a little bit of a Frankenstein bill. It had two big components in it. It did have active intelligent speed assistance and also side underride guards. What was interesting about that was we had members of Families for Safe Streets that were interested in both of these pieces. So that is why we did approach this the way that we did. And speed, because speed is the #1 killer. This was very interesting to us in knowing that we do need to start thinking about how do we regulate speed in drivers, which is a main focus for Walk San Francisco. What we definitely knew that this was going to be swinging for the fences, getting these two pieces together, getting this bill moving forward. Yeah, so I can also see and show what ended up happening after an entire campaign. We, as Ben mentioned, we were pretty successful in getting what we call a passive ISA to the governor's desk. So this is an audio and a visual alerting drivers when they're moving more than 10 miles per hour above the speed limit. And this would be in California vehicles starting in 2030. I want to say that we ran an absolutely stellar campaign. And part of that campaign was really critical to have those voices from people who have been in traffic crashes, who had lost loved ones. And we did everything from an in-person campaign, going to Sacramento, showing up, being expert witnesses in the hearings. We ran an online campaign as well, where it was victims of traffic violence speaking directly to decision makers and telling them why this is important. And we also encouraged the general public to call in, tell their message, and speak up because this is important to them. All in all, we did about 5,000 emails. We got hundreds of phone calls, and we really did an amazing job in widespread national, which was really important to us because we knew that that's what our governor needed to hear from national. So we had the New York Times, the LA Times, and also the Washington Post cover this bill and our work. And what was also really critical is we had endorsements from national safety experts. And in great part was because of coalition building and the work that we ended up doing with the National Families for Safe Streets. I am so proud of how far we got in a very short time in a bill that this was our first bite at the apple. We did get a California State Assembly vote 42-12, and a state assembly voted 26-9 to pass 961. And unfortunately, the governor did not sign it, but we're looking again to go forward on another bite at the apple, and hopefully getting something that DC and New York is also looking at with repeat offenders. But I can talk a little bit more about, why we're doing this at the state level, what kind of time and resources it takes for a small nonprofit to tackle this work, and honestly, the biggest, most important thing is coalition building and how we go about the work. So I will stop there and pass it over to Amy so she can share a little bit more about what she's working on at the national level.
Thank you, Jodie. So I will share mine also. So just a little bit about Families for Safe Streets. As Ben said, we are the group no one should ever have to join. We all lost a family member in a traffic crash, and we have a two-part mission to fight for safe streets and also to provide support to anybody who's been personally impacted. And we do fight for the safety for everyone, pedestrians, cyclists, drivers, and passengers. We need to solve this crisis together, focusing on the upstream solutions. And you will see safer vehicles as a part of our focus. I do this work for my son. Last month, still hard. I marked 11 years since he was killed. You know, next year he'll be gone as long as I had him. It's like an unimaginable heartache. And we share our stories to fight for change because Sammy was bright and courageous, and I channel his courage in this work. So I thought this slide is very interesting. Like, as we look at focusing on what I call the poor stepchild in the safe system approach about really looking at safe vehicles, it's really interesting to look back on history. The successes we have had on safer vehicles did not come easily. And this was news to me. Like, it turns out the seatbelts we all take for granted, it was a huge controversy to get them. And they didn't start at the federal level. Wisconsin said, you know what? I'm not waiting for the feds. I'm going to step ahead and set the tone and set a precedent that then becomes a federal standard. And I think those are two very important lessons, that it's not going to be easy and we have to start with incremental steps. So I wanted to back up and just explain a little bit about the three kinds of this anti-speeding technology. For many years, there have been a kind that, is fixed. Basically, trucks have had these for decades. It basically says the vehicle can't go above 80 miles an hour. Doesn't know what the speed limit is. It's just a maximum speed limit. There is the passive intelligent speed assistance, which was the compromise bill that Jodie was talking about, where you just get an alert. It's the same kind of alert if you're not wearing your seatbelt. It basically says, beep, 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 you're going too fast. Or your steering wheel may shake, or there may be a visual alert. And then the last kind is a new technology that has been around for a while. I should say it's only new to those of us who are learning about it. It's been around for a while, that reads the speed limit around you by pre-programmed signs or looking at the speed limit on a lot of cars today or on your phone, right? You have Waze, it's telling you what the speed limit is. It's using that technology and then coupling it with devices that prevent you from accelerating or will slow you down. And it's really easy to install. We had a vendor at a workshop that we gave at a different conference, and this is his slides, 2 to 3 simple connections, 30 to 45 minutes. It's really easy to add on to any car. It doesn't have to be only for new cars. It is something you could add on any car and really make a difference. So we have 3 different approaches. I'm going to go through them very quickly because we are going to want some time for question and answers. But our first real focus that we think has really the most promise in this political climate is to add it for the worst of the worst drivers, right? You can see on the right, there's a slide of the number of drivers who get huge number of speed camera tickets in New York City, 243 in 1 year. That guy should not be on the road, right? And if he is, we should be doing something to make sure he does not cause harm. Drivers who have repeat speeding, red light running, and other dangerous behavior are known to be disproportionately responsible for causing harm. So they had a bill that had in Washington, D.C., our D.C. chapter went, wow, I love that bill you introduced in New York. They got it introduced and passed and jumped ahead of us. It is a little bit of a higher threshold. It is mandating this active form of intelligent speed assistance only for drivers whose license was suspended or revoked. because of excessive speeding or reckless driving. We're saying before they even revoke your license, it really should be in the vehicles of people who just get lots of tickets. As Ben shared, we're joining in and supporting the Safer Fleets Challenge. And I love this quote. I will share. It is not mine, but really, it makes common sense that government workers operating government vehicles should follow government speed limits, right? And, you know, we're supporting the America Walk effort to get 50 governments to adopt ISA, the active form, again, so it prevents speeding. It doesn't just warn you, by 2025. And really, the federal government should be leading the way. We have a petition from one of our members. I hope everyone today will sign on. And finally, we supported Jodie in the efforts that she shared. I will say politically, this one is probably the hardest because it's basically saying every vehicle in a state should have it, and the governor vetoed it, saying that the federal government really needs to rule on this, and every state is going to probably now defer to that. It's easier to say really just the bad drivers should have this technology and the more stringent form of the technology, because everybody thinks they are not the bad driver. It is going to be a politically and really logically an easier way to go by saying it should be fleets and it should be the worst of the worst drivers. And I'll, just wrap up with, we get all kinds of questions. We'll share out these slides. I won't go through them, but yes, the technology can be structured. It does work. It has lots of benefits and it's not that expensive. Please know if you ever come into contact with anybody who's lost a family member or been seriously injured in a crash, I know personally it can be a lifesaver to know you're not going through this alone. We have a team of social workers in English and Spanish. We are here to support with a variety of assistance. We hope people will share their story on our new story map. If they have a personal story, it's all on here and I can put it in the chat. And this Sunday is World Day of Remembrance. We have a toolkit to even just support on social media about the event. So everything is on the WDOR USA website. That's it for me. I'll turn it over to Kea.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you so much to Jodie and to America Walks for inviting us all here. I am Kea Wilson. As mentioned, I'm senior editor at Streetsblog USA. Streetsblog USA is an advocacy journalism outfit covering what we call the movement to end car dependency in the United States. And a very important ingredient of that is safety, and a very important ingredient of the safety picture is safer vehicles. So when I say that I'm an advocacy journalist, I mean that I cover advocates for the most part, like Amy, like Jodie. I don't cover Jodie and Amy's work in New York and San Francisco as much because we have affiliates in New York and San Francisco that you should certainly check out. But I'm primarily covering the national picture, as well as other countries, as has already been mentioned in the chat, who have leapfrogged the United States on these issues. Almost everything that we've covered, especially in our fabulous intro with Ben earlier, I've written a standalone article about each and every one of those regulations or laws. And I've also written a lot about how Europe and Japan and other countries have implemented even more forward-thinking processes. On top of that, I also write a lot about culture, and I'm sure that we'll get into this in the Q&A. Our barriers to having a safer vehicle fleet are not just legal, they are also cultural. They are also about the American imagination and attachment to those vehicles in general, but also towards large vehicles. And yeah, I make an effort to spotlight every effort that I can find about how we can make our cities safer, both from the vehicle safety perspective, from the road safety perspective, and from the perspective of making cars not our dominant mode of transportation, because I like to say the safest car on the road is one that isn't on the road. It's a bike, it's someone walking, it's someone on a bus or on a train. So that's the long and short about me. I'll leave it pretty brief because I'm excited to dig into this conversation with all of you.
Thanks, Kea and Amy and Jodie. We'll shift gears a little bit here into a bit of a conversation. And we have a lot of local advocates on the call, people who are doing work in their communities. Tackling safer vehicles seems big sometimes, right? That's a big system that you're taking on as a local advocate. And we hear a lot as well, how should I balance my energy between advocating for safer streets in my neighborhood, in my community, and safer vehicles in my neighborhood and community. And I was hoping you all could speak a little bit, in your work, the work of others you covered as well, how that balance plays out and where you see about putting your energy and priorities.
I'm happy to jump in first. As I mentioned, we are a small organization. We are, less than 10 staff. We decided to do a lot more of the state work because we realized that the state advocacy needs to unlock a lot of the tools that the local jurisdiction needs. So when we started doing our state work, it was really about making sure that the SFMTA could have the ability to change speed limits and help with enforcement. Because speeding is the #1 thing, we are looking at every single piece that's needed to really manage speed. So I would say that we balance, it's not quite 50-50. It's more of 75 local and 25 at the state. But again, we're very lucky to have a Families for Safe Streets chapter that really helps elevate the importance of the work. And so we've been investing more and more in the work in Sacramento.
And I'll add to that too. I mean, we, came together in 2014, and our work really for the many early years was around speed limits and roadway design. That has been, I think, the core for most advocacy organizations across the country. And we're really starting to move into this space around safer vehicles because we see the data shows that the bigger, heavier vehicles are undermining all the gains we're making in the other areas. And if we don't address that too, we will never solve this crisis.
And I'll just tag on to that from the St. Louis perspective. As mentioned, I'm the Midwesterner on the call today. I think a lot of that conversation is contextual and it's regional. I'm very inspired when I hear about legendary advocates in large coastal cities that they are feeling like the progress that they've made is undermined by the growing size of our vehicle. I hate that that's happening. I live in a city where the progress has not been made on street safety. I think there are a lot of communities in the United States that recognize rightly that when a vehicle is going 40 miles an hour or more, which is in a lot of our communities, it's going to kill a pedestrian almost statistically 100% of the time, regardless of whether it's a big truck or a small coupe. And so we have to be cautious about where we put our energies and where we put our time and our resources, because almost all of this work, I should say, is done by heroic volunteers. There are very few people in the United States who are working on pedestrian safety specifically on a full-time capacity, and organizations like America Walks are really heroic for as much time as they can put into it. That said, I think that there is no community that can afford to ignore the role of vehicle size, even if you are in a city like mine, where we're mostly worried about our 45-mile-an-hour arterials that are in the middle of our towns, because this is an unchecked problem that tends to get worse, especially as the fleet electrifies. An electric car is going to be about 30% heavier than its gas-powered counterpart, and that is going to affect safety at those slower speeds, even if we succeed in slowing cars down. I will also say that speed and size are really heavily interrelated. I don't think we talk enough about the fact that when you are in the seat of a very tall vehicle, you actually perceive that your own speed is slower than it actually is. It affects the way that the human brain perceives the roadway environment. So these issues are inextricable. I think that we can't afford to fall down on any front. We need to pursue every solution that we have available to us everywhere we are, which I know is a tall order. But I see it as my role to bring as much information as I can to advocates so they can craft regionally sensitive plans that make the best use of their resources.
If I can just add one more thing, Ben, before we jump forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
The thing that I think is also very important is Walk San Francisco and San Francisco in general passed our Vision Zero policy in 2014. The landscape looks so different, which is what Amy said. The things that we were trying to combat back in 2014 are not exactly the same things that we're combating right now. if you look at heavier vehicles, faster vehicles, a Tesla can go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. That wasn't part of the equation 10 years ago. So as things change, as technology changes, the advocates and the street designers and the city agencies and also the federal government have to keep up with that to keep us safe. It is, we really firmly believe that it is our leaders that have the responsibility of making sure that we can get from point A to point B, because we are all pedestrians all the time. It doesn't matter if you drive a car, take a bus, ride a bike. So this is why we do the work, and this is why we have to keep looking to growing our community of advocates across the country and building those coalitions, because the fight just keeps getting a lot harder.
I liked Amy, your point. I think Jodie, you made this too. That so much both on the safer vehicle side, but also on the safer street side is actually controlled at the state level. And that's if you're a local advocate, you need to also be taking action at the state in both of those realms. And so I'm curious, let's say you're a Walk SF out in the world, or Families for Safe Streets in New York, or you're an advocate in St. Louis. What's your first step? You've been advocating in your community for a long time, working with your city. What's your first step that you want to take at that state level? How do you get involved in that sort of advocacy?
I mean, I will share some of our initial efforts, why they were state laws. New York City in New York State is so different that they often have laws that pass for only over X number of million residents, which is basically just saying this law only applies to New York. So our initial work around lowering the speed limit, or that did apply only to New York, but we have since done more that is statewide. And as Jodie said, a critical factor is building a coalition that is statewide. So getting players in all the different communities around the state, and then getting some of the bigger state players that the state electeds or the governor really respects. And that means going outside of the transportation sector. We had many major hospitals, particularly trauma hospitals, as part of a national accreditation process. Trauma hospitals have to address their 3 top reasons for why people come into the hospital for serious injuries. And I can guarantee in every hospital across the country that traffic violence is one of those reasons, and really pushing them and holding them to the fire. I mean, first of all, we had a lot of hospitals who committed to this because they see this every day. And we had ER docs come to us and say, we want to get involved. What can I get my hospital to do? And it was sort of a round up, but they also really are obliged, and you can remind them that as a trauma hospital, they are supposed to be doing something. And so we've had them come out to rallies and vigils and sign on the coalition. So it's hospitals, environmental groups, labor groups. Like, you really have to broaden this movement if you're going to particularly try to do any statewide legislation. You have to be diverse geographically and really start to bring on those big political players.
And also adding to that, I mean, we're pretty small, so it's always important for us to look at who the other players are and who we need on our team in going after this. So we do work very closely with our transportation agency. Are they willing to put in some time, energy, and effort? Are they going to be coordinating other cities across the state? I mean, California is huge. We can't deny that. So, we're in Northern California, and Southern California has a lot more legislators than we have in Northern California. So who are our Southern California partners, whether it be advocacy partners, or who can we get to know in the state legislative bodies down there? It's one of those things where building the coalition in a lot of diverse ways and bringing those voices to the table, and I would say, honestly, tapping into everybody's expertise. We are not the ones that know the halls of Sacramento, but we have partners that do. So how do you really look to them to be your guide on that? Whereas We're known that we bring the voices, we bring the Families for Safe Streets and the human aspect of the why. Why do we do this work? And so that is our expertise. But it is all about the people that you're bringing to the table. And I can't lie, it's incredibly time consuming. So if you are a small organization looking to do this, you do need to factor in the resources that it's going to take.
I think that was all beautifully said, and I totally second everyone about needing to start with building power. I think we need to think a lot more about how we build movements and how we build voices within this work, because we know that we're right, and convincing people we're right is not the way that we win. We win by building power. The only thing I would add to that is I think a lot of people on this call have already taken the first step in that they are looking outside of their individual community. The fact that we have models like Sammy's Law in New York and the California ISA bill in California mean that the groundwork has been done. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think one of the most things that I find most gratifying and exciting about my job is I get to uplift examples from all over the country so that people can then take those and run with them. Like there's no shame in stealing in advocacy. In fact, it is like really the bottom line of what we need to start with. So, and also look overseas, I would say. There are really exciting ideas coming up all the time, and that's really what I've committed my career to documenting.
And just to push on this idea of like coalition building is very, very laborious. It is, and that's why as a movement, we need to be developing many more leaders, including volunteer leaders. Like we always say, we're not, a leaderless, we're a leaderful organization. We invest a lot of time training people who I call the involuntary volunteer army, right? But we need to be doing this not just for people who've been personally impacted, but everyone to really understand the issue and then have them help you build that coalition that you need. If you are bringing in other volunteers to your organization and really investing in them to be leaders, they have connections you do not have. On a recent fight that we had that was named after my son around lowering the speed limit, the opposition was in the eastern part of Queens in New York City, where many more people drive. And we had members who, reached out to every Asian organization because the elected official who was opposing it was worried about that political power, because that is the growing part of her constituency. We got every social service agency, Korean social service, Chinese American planning count, like everyone signed on, and then she moved.
I think on the coalition building side, it's definitely I feel like it pays unexpected dividends. I think in a lot of ways, you open up a lot of new avenues to collaborate and work together, and that's you might not expect at the beginning of setting out to establish those relationships.
I mean, there was a comment in the chat that I answered, but I can do it publicly. Like, as you're reaching out to coalition partners, they might not understand the implications of what you're asking. So someone put in the chat that there's, a Phoenix trauma hospital. They were actually opposed to the bike lanes. There is an educative process in this. I knew nothing about this issue until it happened to me, and understanding that bike lanes are not just to protect cyclists, but really explaining the whole roadway design concept of managing for speed and, narrowing the lanes by giving some to whether it's a wider sidewalk or a bike lane. Like, you have to take the time to explain. I wouldn't assume that they are necessarily unmovable. They just may not have understood what the issues were, and it is an investment of time to help people understand why the change you are fighting for is important.
Yeah, that's an important question, I think, too. What do you all see as some of the largest barriers, for in advocating for safer vehicles? And then, the flip side of that is what do you, what do you see as some of the pathways forward to overcome those barriers?
I can start this one. So I'm coming at this mostly from the perspective of covering federal regulation, which is frankly the bulk of the regulation that we are fighting for at the national level when it comes to protecting pedestrians. And I think for me, the biggest barrier, and this is something I'm just starting to get my arms around as I learn about it as a journalist, is a very opaque regulatory environment that is poised to become even more opaque and perhaps more dysfunctional in the next administration. We should just acknowledge that and get our arms around it. I'll post a link in the chat to a story that I did just by way of an object lesson in this about there was a proposed side underride guard standard in NHTSA. There was a study to find out if we could implement those in a way that was cost effective for the trucking industry that was ultimately silenced. And I learned a lot in writing about that story about the way that we value the potential to lose human life, how we use that to calculate whether mass vehicle regulation is worth it, which, you know, for me, as someone who's lost an uncle to a crash with a pickup truck, for, you know, others on this call, like who have Amy, who have lost their loved ones in traffic violence. Jodie, I don't know if you're in this terrible club as well, but statistically you probably are. There is no amount of money that you could put on it, but we do live in a regulatory environment that does put not a value on human life, but a value on the potential to save human life. And within that regulatory environment, we also have a lot of industry influence. You know, part of why that particular rule was quashed before it could start was because the auto industry was brought in as basically like peer reviewers on this study before it was published. And, you know, the whistleblower alleges, I can't say for sure that this is what was said in this room, that the industry folks in that room said, why should we have to pay for equipment when these people are idiots who are going to get swept under the wheels of a truck? How you should be able to avoid that. There are profound cultural barriers even within those regulatory rooms. It's not just a structural problem that we can solve, but I do think that it is all solvable if we dig in our heels. We get to learn about how all of this stuff works and slowly chip away at building power, as has been said throughout this call. So just to give a little teaser on an article I'll share in the chat right
I mean, there are lots of great comments and questions in the chat of like the frustrations of how slow and hard change is. And I didn't mean to make it sound like it is so easy to get some of these bigger, potential partners on board or building our power. You know, you have to just be very strategic about what change is potentially, achievable in your community. It may not be, the biggest and most important thing that we need, but, focus on those upstream solutions, what is achievable, and start bringing people in, into your coalition to fight for it. We're in for a rough number of years on transportation safety. This is, Project 2025 has basically undoing many of the things that we have been fighting for many years. So it's really a time to double down locally on what can you achieve, what is workable, and who can you bring to the table to help you make it happen.
I think that both Amy and Kea have said it beautifully in terms of all the barriers. I mean, as a small nonprofit, the thing that we have to do is it's that balance between working on the big fights at the state legislature and focusing on what we need to focus on at the local level. And so for us, it's resources. I mean, 85% of our budget is staffing. So it's a matter of getting those resources to be able to have the staff to focus on this and do the policy and the organizing.
We have a lot of great audience questions in here, and so let's get to some. I think this one's particularly interesting. And this person actually says they are part of a city staff and interested in installing intelligent speed assistance, looking for support from outside, though, to put pressure on their leadership, city council, etc., to actually continue to pursue this. What's the best way, in this local realm, of finding some of your allies and city staff and working with those allies to create inside outside pressure to make some of these changes happen?
Well, I just want to give kudos to, I don't know where you're from, but that wonderful government employee who wants to make a difference. One thing I always say too, if there are other government folks on the call, is that like, we are the wind at your sails. We are here to help you get done what you want to get done. I know we can be a thorn in your side, but we also really can help you make change. And I do think, the more that we can build allies in government for our supporters to help elevate the changes. I mean, Jodie has done it beautifully with Senator Weiner in California. Like, he is a heroic leader. He wants to do the right thing. He was looking for the coalition of FSS chapters and organizations to really help him achieve what he wanted to do. And I think that is the model that we need to all be working towards. We need to really be there for our big champions, identify who are the fence sitters, and try to move those people over to the supportive column as well. The truth is, probably you're never going to convince most of your opponents. It's just, getting more people in the support column strategically is how we're going to make these changes at the local and state level.
And just to add to that, and thank you, Amy, for that compliment. My biggest thing that I say all the time to our local and state leaders: help us help you. So great communication, letting us know what your priorities are. As Amy said, we are the wind. So if you need more political will, who do we need to push? Who do we need to pull? What are they hearing from the inside? How can we be an ally? And knowing that, yep, we're going to be an ally most of the time, but we are going to be, our job as advocates is to push harder and further, and it's nothing personal. Like, that is the thing that we have to keep remembering. It is not personal. This is our job, and we're all just marching to the same goals. So as advocates, that's what we need to focus on.
I have nothing to add to that. I'm very inspired by your answers. Thank you.
We have some questions about what to expect at the federal level with an incoming Trump administration with regards to regulations on vehicle safety. And I think it's fair and truthful to say that we will likely expect less with regards to the regulations that are coming out, as well as the potential for some regulations that have been enacted to be reversed or undone. But Amy, I take a lot of, I had actually not seen that Wisconsin slide before with the seatbelts. And I learned something new today as well. How do you all see the state and local work on safer vehicles feeding into a federal ecosystem over the next 4 years? What do you think? Where do you see the trajectory of some of that work going?
Well, I do think this is an administration that has people around, an incoming administration that has people around them that's very interested in technology. Some names can go unnamed. And so I do think, like, Vision Zero is really all about speed management. So for us, anti-speeding technology like ISA is a way to ameliorate the growth and size and heaviousness that is coming with electric vehicles. At least we can manage that they will be going the speed limit. I think we need to be looking more at the local and state level on what can be done to set the stage for a period of time to build that momentum until the feds act. And it was really disappointing that it was infuriating that Governor Newsom vetoed the bill, because, there was precedent for it happening at the state level. So the passive ISA, which, now they've said, well, we really should wait for the feds, and we can't just put it in all new vehicles. I think we have to look at some of the other two strategies that I mentioned as more viable. The worst of the worst drivers that are causing disproportionate amounts of harm on our carnage on our roadways, like We've done this before for drunk driving. We've put ignition interlocks in the vehicles of people who are, who are driving drunk. We should put a device that exists, that's proven to work, that they're using in other countries, and the device in the cars of the people who are the most dangerous. And similarly, our government employees at the local, state, and ideally federal government should be leading the way on it as well.
Couldn't agree more. San Francisco already has telematics in its driver fleet for the city agency, and we're going to be pushing on that as the one pillar of let's get our city employees being good drivers, and hopefully that's going to ripple out into everything else. So, but focusing on the local and what you can do locally is probably more of what we're going to do as an organization.
I'll just share a New York tip also, that the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services that oversees the fleets and has done this Safer Fleets pilot in New York, they are expanding the pilot by using their telematics data to put the ISA in the vehicles of the government drivers who are being monitored and are being proven to be not the safest drivers on the road. So there are ways to do this to encourage the use of it very strategically.
I agree with everything that's been said, but I think I want to maybe, I don't know if this is even pushing back slightly, but to add on that, while I do think focusing your energy on the local and state scale is a great idea kind of anytime and in any administration, I want to be honest that the Biden administration did not do enough on vehicle safety in the last 4 years. If we're totally frank, they laid the groundwork for some great future work, but as Beth Osborne said in an interview in City Lab this morning, they wrote a plan and then they didn't do the plan. I mean, we've got a lot of things, exciting proposals that are coming up in like a lame duck administration now that are likely to fall under the wayside by the wayside. And I think it really is a moment, if you are more interested in that federal outlook, if you're more interested in top-down national policy, which is valid and important, especially in the vehicle safety conversation, to take stock of why that happened, to take stock of why we as a country have not taken vehicle size in particular, but other forms of vehicle safety terribly seriously, even as we've committed to a national road safety strategy, we've committed to safe systems. We've had a transportation secretary in office say that the only acceptable number of road deaths is 0. Why hasn't this taken root? And again, this is the time to build power. It's not the time to go to sleep and say, this is the last 4 years, wake me up when Trump is out of office. It's the time to try to focus on the midterms and to be attentive to what might be a very, very different regulatory environment, but might be a regulatory environment that will springboard us into something pretty exciting after it inevitably collapses, in my opinion. So not to editorialize too much, but don't give up hope is the short answer. But also don't give up on your local and state outlook as well, because that is where you can have the most tangible outlook right now.
Working on the national scale, I think it's important to remind everyone at home that America Walks, its allies, its staff, we can show up and talk to congressional staff, talk to members of Congress, provide them with ideas, but at the end of the day, they care what people in their districts think. They care what people in their states think. The more, obviously this is a bandwidth and capacity issue for a lot of folks out there, but the more that you as advocates can also establish relationships with your congressional offices, even if that's just showing up to an event, asking a question about safer vehicles, sending a message, asking a question about safer vehicles, making it known that that's a priority amongst constituents can be really powerful. Really, I think if there's a theme of our conversation today, it is building power is what will make this change, not necessarily having the right or best ideas. That's what's needed. So I'd like to, realizing we're at time, take a moment to thank our great panelists. It's a really excellent conversation today. I'm so glad we got it recorded. And yeah, thank you all in our audience for the work you do, for coming today, for your continued advocacy, whether you're a local advocate on the ground, whether you're working with a larger organization, whether you're working with government. So we'll pick up with our America Walks webinars in the coming months. If you'd like to follow us, we have our social media across the board. We're now also, in addition to the normal sources, I think we now have a Blue Sky account as well. And so, yeah, let's give one more round of applause for our panelists and have a great day, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.